Melanoma Matters is an educational resource, and the opinions we express are our own and do not reflect medical advice. If you have questions specific to your own situation, please contact your own clinician. This podcast may be available in both audio and visual, so please check your platform. Yeah.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to Melanoma Matters. I'm Sapna Patel.
And I'm James Larkin. Hi.
Today we've got a special guest, and we don't often reach terribly far outside of our discipline, James, to have guests, but here we've got a really special guest, as you and I were just saying, one of our favorite orators, somebody who, when they're at the podium, it's a not to be missed event. So Monty Pal from City of Hope, thank you so much for joining us on our podcast today.
Sapna, it's great to be here. Thanks for having me.
So James, you want to kick it off with some quick wire intros, whatever?
Yeah, so what we normally do, Monty, is we ask people a little bit about their background. When they decided they want to be a doctor, where they go to medical school, what's your journey been like in your life to get to where you are at the moment, and then maybe a little bit about what you're doing now, you've been doing in the last few years, I guess.
Yeah, sure. It's kind of an interesting path that I took. I have never left Los Angeles. So I was born here in LA. I have gone as far as Cal State Los Angeles, which is a small state school for college. I went to UCLA for medical school and residency. I guess what's interesting is I actually started college when I was 13 in a special program. And it allows you to sort of skip over high school and some of those early years. And so I had sort of an early trajectory into medicine, which frankly is a really helpful thing because it's such a long road. And so after I finished medical school, I thought to myself, gosh, what do I want to do? It was such an exciting time in oncology because at UCLA, Dennis Slayman and other folks were doing a ton of cool stuff in HER2 biology. So I started actually researching breast cancer, became interested in oncology on the whole, and I guess the rest is history.
I never knew that you were a Doogie Howser. That was incredible, Monty. Does that resonate, that reference, James?
Oh yeah. So okay. we had Doogie Howser. So listen, were you really good at maths, or I should say math, I apologize, at school, Monty, or not? But think about your answer to the question. Were you really good at math at school?
Because, yeah, well, I'll just pretend this is an audio podcast. How about that? I'll just rather, because I don't want it to cut off the podcast. But it was, yeah, I guess I was, probably focused mainly on math. I had traditional Indian tiger parents. Sapna, you'll be familiar with this. There's actually a lot of dialogue about this on social media, as you know, from people who I shall not name, right? But, my mom and dad were totally set on me kind of knowing math and science. And I was down this path of engineering when I was pretty young. But yeah, I mean, what's interesting is my dad passed away when I was 13. So it was my very first year at university. And, at that point, I was sort of on the fence. I thought to myself, gosh, do I stick with this path of engineering that I've been groomed for? Do I try something different? All of my friends back then were actually going into medicine. So I actually decided to pivot, change course, and head down that path. So it turned out to be the best decision I ever made. I love my job, love, kind of doing what I do. But it definitely was a very sort of unconventional path, I'll say.
Yeah, I mean, the reason I ask is that, Sapna and I have talked about this quite a lot. I suppose over the last few months, we've both got extremely similar stories. And it makes me wonder how many of our colleagues who are out there, maybe I'm not sure it's a med-onc thing, maybe it's a doctor thing, where kind of the kids at school who were really, really good at science and math, or maths, as we would say on this side of the Atlantic. And then for whatever reason, didn't sort of go into let's call it a hard science, maths, engineering, physics, that kind of thing, and end up being doctors and are now medical. Yeah, so you dropped out then, Monty. We don't know why, but interestingly, you've appeared in a different place. I'm now in the middle.
Right.
Is it the same for you guys or not?
It is.
No, it's fine. I mean, part of the charm here is the...
we are at the edges.
Yeah, we're not completely perfect. Well, I say we. Sapna's the one who does all the work. I mean, I know nothing about any of this kind of stuff at all. Right, so let's pick up there. So Monty, that's a bit about your background, how you ended up in medicine. So what about what you're doing now in your clinic in terms of tumor type, your interest, your focus, that kind of thing?
Yeah. So I when I started at City of Hope, there was this legendary figure in kidney cancer, Bob Figlin, who I was working with. He was at City of Hope, which is this small dedicated cancer center that I did my fellowship at. And this was at the time that sunitinib was actually coming out. So in kidney cancer, we always used to talk about East Coast Bob and West Coast Bob. There was Bob Mozart and Bob Figlin. Bob Mozart, of course, is still, big in our field. Bob Figlin has taken on more administrative roles, I would say, at his new hospital, Cedars-Sinai. So, I worked with him for the...
Can we help you?
Oh, there you go. You got Bob, and Ronnie B. Yeah. So I worked with West Coast Bob for 3 years, and then he actually left to take over Cedars-Sinai, which is the same cancer center that Omid's at now, right? And so this was a big fork in the road for me. And I thought, well, what do I do? Do I, go back to focusing on breast cancer, which was my real passion during residency? Do I kind of stay in this kidney cancer lane? And so I was actually the sole kind of GU oncologist at the time. And we kind of built this, tiny program where we had 5 or 6 patients accrued to clinical trials per year to one now where we have probably about 150 a year on GU cancers, going on. So, we've grown as a group. We've got about 7 GU oncologists now. We're still not huge, but my partner / big sister, Tanya Dorf, actually runs our GU program. She focuses on prostate, and then we've got different folks focusing on bladder. I do kidney. And I'll tell you, I actually started, my career just really focused on traditional phase 1 through 3 trials. And, this whole topic today, the microbiome, I think became salient to me only, 5 or 6 years into my tenure on faculty.
It's kind of nice, right? Oh, sorry, James. Go ahead.
No, go on. I mean, I'm just actually reading Monty's chapter in this book. Do you recognize this, Monty, or not?
I do. I think I've got that on my shelf at work too. That's Yeah.
So listen. Chapter 23. Developmental and incorporation of biomarkers in RCC therapeutics. Monty Pal and Bob Figlin, page 527. I'm not sure I can do a posh British. Well, I probably could if I was forced to. The other. There's lots of our friends in here. There's a chapter with Tony Shueri, and chapter 19 is the role of targeted therapy in special populations by James M.G. Larkin and Martin E. Gore. Actually, the story of why this book's on the shelf is because, well, you'll know Martin, obviously, Monty.
Yeah.
Well, Martin died almost 6 years ago next week, and this was Martin's office. We were kind of going through everything. And he had so much rubbish, right? He had like the British Journal of Cancer going back to like 1913 or something, covered in dust right on the shelf over there. You kind of like practically needed respiratory gear to even like take the books off the shelf. Anyway, so we kept a few of Martin's books just in a really small section on the shelf up there for sentimental reasons, actually. So I didn't prepare that book was on the shelf. So yeah, that's nice, isn't it?
Amazing.
So anyway. Yeah.
So I guess we've been connected for a long time then, just without knowing it.
Yeah, absolutely. So now you're doing GU cancers, right? And is that kind of everything in the GU world, or is kidney your major focus, would you say?
I would say that over the past 3 or 4 years, I've been lucky enough, so we're a smallish place, I think, relative to many. So I've been fortunate to be able to focus on kidney. It's interesting. City of Hope, I don't know how much y'all know about it, but, when I started there, we could actually probably fit all of our faculty in a room the size that I'm sitting in right now. I think we had 18 medical oncologists, but we've kind of been on this growth spurt recently. So we opened up a new hospital in Irvine, which is a larger suburb here in Southern California. We opened up sites in Chicago and Atlanta and Phoenix. So now we have about 200 oncologists. So it's really kind of allowed us to grow a little bit and sort of spread our wings in terms of having our physicians focus on individual specialties, which has been kind of cool. It's been a very nice development, I would say.
And who's running your melanoma stuff out there? Interacted with one of your dermatologists. Modi. I'm forgetting his first name.
Yeah, Batu Modi. Yeah, he's
Yeah. And actually, it was at one of Bob Figlen Cedar's conferences in the fall. And Modi was so kind to give me a ride to the airport because I couldn't seem to catch an Uber. He was like, I'll take you. So we were chatting, and we were chatting about the melanoma program at City of Hope. And he's like, why don't you come on over? I was like, if I hadn't just moved to Denver, it's lovely. But what's going on with melanoma there at City of Hope?
Well, that's the whole reason I came on this program is we're looking for a lead for melanoma, and I thought this would be a great place to advertise for that. So, we have a terrific melanoma specialist who you may remember from MD Anderson, Yan Zing. So
Sure.
Yan does a lot of our melanoma work right now. But we had Kim Margolin at our shop for a very long time, and she left a couple years ago. But we're definitely in need of somebody really focused in on melanoma.
It would be incredible to work with you and for you, Monty. You're an incredible leader, and you've mentored a lot of people in this space. And, part of how we really got connected is last year, one of my last, years at MD Anderson, the first year oncology fellow that came through. Month one, it's July. The one that came through was Nasli Diesman. Came through, and I was so excited to work with her because of how much you thought of her, how much you had mentored her. Tony Shueri had mentored her as well. And I mean, as expected, she was a star. So she came through, and I had a weekend with her. I think we even called you when we were making rounds one weekend, or we sent you a picture or something. And she was just one bit of evidence of how much you are doing to help next generation. She was telling me about the microbiome research and all of that. So maybe that's a good segue into you telling us how, like you said, the three of us are not necessarily junior in this field anymore. We can't really claim to be, but it's kind of fun to know that microbiome just sort of piqued your interest in the last few years. It's nice to know that we don't get stale where we are. There are still things kind of getting us energized and interested. So what got you to swing to the microbiome space?
Yeah, funny enough, this was a conversation that I had with my biostatistician. So I've got this wonderful biostatistician at City of Hope. He now runs most of our biostatistical group. His name is Paul Frankel. And, many biostatisticians are really kind of preoccupied with, conventional models or looking at Bayesian algorithms, et cetera, right? But he's a little bit different. He really has a strong clinical hat. And a long time ago, he came to me and said, this is probably in, when was it? I'm going to say maybe 2010, thereabouts. Okay, so he comes to me and says, Monty, I've got tons of friends who are in the agriculture industry, right? And in the agriculture industry, they pay so much attention to the microbiome. If you had chicken for dinner last night, right, guaranteed the feed that chicken is getting is so well thought out, right? The microbiome plays a role in terms of how they estimate cage sizes and so forth, right? Because they want to make sure that there's a reasonable spread. They're trying to ensure this, a fecal content amongst the animals and so forth, right? And he's like, why aren't you guys thinking about this in medicine? And I thought, well, that's actually pretty brilliant. So we started in 2011 or thereabouts, doing some just proof of principle studies. So I guess it's about 14 years ago now. And we started collecting stool from patients with kidney cancer and just doing sort of basic genomic profiling with a technique called 16S rRNA sequencing. And we had this paper in CCR in 2015 that showed that you can profile a stool of patients with kidney cancer. And that particular paper did seem to suggest that with some of the therapies that we talked about at the top of this podcast, sunitinib, pazopanib, et cetera, you could potentially predict who does and doesn't get diarrhea on the basis of their stool profile. Now, this is, a small study, 20 patients. And I remember we ran it by Dan George, one of our mutual colleagues in GU Cancer, to, kind of get this into CCR because it was a little different at the time. But it was kind of our first showing in that space. And then, of course, you guys in melanoma did an amazing job of, I think, pushing the envelope even further. And we started taking much of the same approach in our microbiome research at City of Hope.
So do you find the microbiome is prognostic of outcomes, predictive of things like side effects, or is it an intervention? Is it a therapeutic we should be aiming for?
I mean, if I'm being honest, I think we're just scratching the surface with a lot of this stuff now. I mean, there's this triumvirate of papers that I always like to talk about that came out in Science from the University of Chicago group. It was the group of Gustav Rusi, and then MD Anderson, of course, with Jen Wargo and team. And this came out in 2017, and I think was really sort of formative in the microbiome field, suggesting that you could potentially have a link between checkpoint inhibitors and outcomes with immunotherapy. So specific bacteria could potentially predict clinical outcome, response or non-response. And these three papers were really straddled across three different malignancies. Two were in melanoma, and one sort of combined a cohort of patients with kidney and lung cancer. In fact, the challenge with those papers, right, is that it wasn't, and no pun intended, it wasn't clean work in the sense that, you're seeing that different bacteria are predicting outcomes in each one of these different papers. I mean, good work from the standpoint of, the technical merits and so forth, but in some ways confusing, right? I mean, it's almost as though you would produce three different genomic predictors for clinical outcomes with melanoma from tissue, right? Here we're getting a similar result. So I think one thing that the field is still struggling with is harmonization of those results. Is there a single predictor with the microbiome of clinical outcome? I think we're getting a little closer to that these days.
Do you think like 16S sequencing is enough, or should we be doing more of shotgun metagenomic sequencing to look at these?
So, I think the best paper in this space really comes from Laurence at Vogel's group at Gustav Rusi and Lisa DeRosa, who was a longtime postdoc in her lab, now I think faculty. But Lisa had this very elegant paper in Cell, must have come out maybe 3-4 months ago now. And it actually used an approach in which they looked at all the key data sets that have been published to date, linking clinical outcome with microbiome profile, largely using metagenomic sequencing, I would say, right? Because then you get, sort of good species level data in a lot of these cases. And they came up with the formula for what they simply called dysbiosis, right? Dysbiosis is a bad gut, right? And they were able to really sort of identify that across these various cohorts, if you look at patients with cancer, be it bladder cancer, lung cancer, melanoma, et cetera, you're going to probably have about, somewhere in the ballpark, I'm going to guesstimate here, 50-ish% of individuals who are dysbiotic. So it's not everybody, no doubt, but it's a fairly substantial proportion of patients. Whereas if you look across a healthy population of individuals, it's going to be closer to 20%. What's interesting is that, they used a consortium of bacteria to define dysbiosis. And they actually, their group is long focused on a single bacterium called Akkermansia. And there's actually companies now that are built around, therapeutic strategies with Akkermansia. In fact, Laurence and Vogel has a brilliant company, I think, that's in that specific therapeutic space. But what's interesting about Akkermansia, and this is maybe a lesson for us as we shift towards therapeutics, is that when you factor that into the profile for dysbiosis, it looks as though there's a good level of Akkermansia, there's a level that's insufficient, and then there's a level that's overly sufficient. So, getting to that sweet spot of certain microbial elements is probably where we want to go. So just like with chemo, right, there's probably a matter of overdosing and underdosing.
Yeah.
Which maybe brings us neatly to the next question, which is going to be about intervention, I guess, and the evidence. So maybe before, we talk about, let's call it bacterial intervention. What about other things that you might do in terms of a healthy lifestyle, let's say a quote unquote healthy lifestyle? Could exercise and diet being the obvious ones. Do you think there's anything in either of those things or both of them together which could positively influence your microbiome in such a way that it would be of therapeutic benefit, or is it all still speculation at this stage?
Yeah, I mean, I will say there's probably a lot of hand waving in this space, but the paper that I always cite when I'm with patients in the clinic comes actually from Sapna's, former institution, from MD Anderson and Jen Wargo's group. She, Christine Spencer, and a group of other investigators. I think you were on this paper too, Sapna. It was a really, really elegant paper that looked at a cohort of about 130-ish patients with melanoma. I want to say, and really did a deep dive of their diet using a retrospective dietary survey. And what they showed in this cohort of individuals with melanoma receiving checkpoint inhibitors, and something you're going to have to keep me honest here, is that it actually seemed as though individuals that had a high fiber diet, and specifically that amounts to more than 20 grams per day, seemed to fare better in terms of their clinical outcome. There was a caveat too. If you actually were just taking random probiotics over the counter, if you go into, like, in America here, we have these stores called GNC where you can, literally probably buy every, live bacterial product that exists under the sun. If you're just taking some random hodgepodge of these, outcomes were actually inferior. So it's a lesson learned that we probably don't want our patients just taking this random smorgasbord of probiotics. But fiber seems to be somewhat interesting. And Sapna, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think Jen's presented some of this work in public domain. She has this really cool study where she's using a kitchen at MD Anderson to manufacture a diet for patients. And she's trying to target getting above a threshold of 50 grams of fiber a day, which is a lot of fiber, right?
It really is. Yeah, that you nailed it, Monty. And it comes from another Jennifer at MD Anderson, Jennifer McQuaid, who's doing this biomedical kitchen work and nutrition work. She has a study called the Diet Study. It actually stands for Dietary Intervention. And I'm forgetting the E and the T, but it's a lovely, it's a nice acronym, and it was preliminarily presented at AACR, I think, last year. Essentially, the first thing was just to see if you give cancer patients, who are perhaps on surveillance or, not actually on active interventional therapy, if you give them a diet, a preordained diet, will they stick to it? So what is the compliance or adherence? Turns out it's not great. And then the question was, which, we had already known, can you adjust somebody's microbiome just by changing their diet? That's been proven in a non-cancer population, but that was part of the work. Yes, you can shift a baseline microbiome by increasing the fiber if they're compliant. But then it moved into the therapeutic space of patients with actual cancer. But a lot of caveats. It was difficult to do this in patients with active diabetes, difficult to do it in patients on certain medications. So, as we often will say, we were sort of picking the Olympians of our patients, to be on these studies. But essentially, we could seem to change the outcome of these patients by changing their diet. So you change their diet by increasing fiber, you recruit the bacteria, fiber fermenting bacteria, to create more short chain fatty acids, and so on and so forth, and the interplay with your immunotherapy. And of course, this was also proof of principle through the Pittsburgh group, where they then took non-responding patients with melanoma and essentially gave them colonoscopies and showered the intestines with the microbiome of the responding melanoma patients. And lo and behold, the tumors started responding in a portion of those patients. So augmenting the microbiome can have therapeutic effects. I think you're getting to the point, Monty, which is like, well, which bacteria? How do we deliver it? How often? How compliant are people? Could you just do it by dietary switch? So we are probably just scratching the surface about how to move our knowledge of, yes, the microbiome matters, to how do we now run with the microbiome to change our outcomes.
Yeah.
Or Sapna shower, I think you said, with the microbiome.
Shower.
I just thought that was interesting choice of verb there. Anyway, listen, no, that's a great link, isn't it? So Monty, you had 2 papers, I think, in Nature Medicine. Would love to hear a bit about both of those, because then we're really starting to get into this question of intervention, I think, aren't we? So, yeah.
Yeah, first of all, in Nature Medicine, the editors there, Saheli Sadhanan and others, they've been so open-minded about the microbiome literature, which is terrific. And of course, they've published some of the seminal work around fecal microbiome transplant and so forth. One of the big challenges with fecal microbiome transplant is that it's something that we've looked into at our institution, but as a freestanding cancer center, we just don't have the infrastructure to do it. We can't get our GI folks to really sort of pony up the resources to put together this very sort of intensive process and procedure. And fecal microbiome transplant, too, has really come under a microscope recently because of a lot of safety issues around it as well. And
there's a South Park episode about it as well.
Is there a South Park episode?
Yeah. It's called Turd Burglars.
Okay.
It is Tom Brady, and everybody's trying to basically cut a hole under Tom Brady's toilet to collect his microbiome. And the women are running around saying they got a fecal microbiome transplant, and they feel wonderful, and they feel great. And then, of course, as you can imagine, all hell breaks loose when safety becomes an issue.
Oh, this is wow! I'm speechless because
So good.
We need to get that in the show notes, though, don't we, Sapna? Yeah, the fact check so that everybody knows exactly which South Park episode it was. Anyway, listen, Monty, back to you. Go on.
So this turd burglar approach is a challenging one, right? So we've actually focused a little more on the process of getting sort of a single strain of bacteria into patients. And if you look at the Japanese literature, for decades they've been using this compound called CBM 588. So CBM stands for Clostridium butyricum. When you think about how we feel the microbiome might exert a change in the general immune milieu, we think it's probably via secretion of short-chain fatty acids from the gut. So things like propionate, butyrate, these are all really labile, really hard to measure. But in any case, this agent's been used in Japan for years for general GI ailments. And there was a retrospective paper looking at patients with non-small cell lung cancer getting checkpoint inhibitors. And those individuals that just happened to be buying CBM 588, taking it over the counter and so forth, had amazing outcomes relative to those who didn't. But this is retrospective. That was in about 120-ish patients. We designed these two very small, very, very small 30-patient randomized trials, 20 patients in the experimental arm, 10 in the control arm. So nothing you can really sort of write home about definitively. But one trial looked at Nivo-Ipi, plus or minus CBM 588. The other looked at Cabo-Nivo, plus or minus CBM 588. Both of these trials were run by my superstar fellows. Nazli Disman ran the first one with Nivo-Ipi. And Hedye Ibrahimi, who's one of my current fellows, she's applying for residency now, wrote the second paper. And both showed a pretty strong signal for clinical benefit. So if you look at the data, response rates were more than double when you add CBM 588 to this base regimen of immunotherapy. And so, of course, you can't stop there after these tiny 30-patient trials. So right now, we just got approval to move forward with the phase 3 study in SWOG. I've got my SWOG hat on now, which actually looks at immunotherapy plus or minus CBM 588. So Pedro Barata, who's a great young investigator from Case Western, is going to be running that trial.
Can I just ask, if I may, so is that Ipi-Nivo, or could it be checkpoint inhibitor plus anti-VEGF treatment? You said immunotherapy plus minus. Just curious.
Oh, yeah. So good question. So the trial allows for any base immunotherapy regimen. So folks could be getting Nivo-Ipi, they could be getting Cabo-Nivo. Initially, when we structured the trial, we actually did try to keep it sort of a little bit more honed, but as you both know, whether it's EORTC or SWOG or what have you, these trials go through so many modifications along the way. So it actually got opened up to any sort of subtype of or base regimen.
Yeah, I mean, that's amazing. So let's say in due course, a few years in the future, I suppose, isn't it? The trial's positive. I know nothing about this at all, which is why I'm going to ask. Is there any kind of regulatory or reimbursement position here? I mean, is this stuff easy enough to buy anyway, or is it controlled in any way? Because it feels a little bit like what you said before. Some of this stuff's available over the counter, but this specific product, would a doctor need to prescribe it, do you think, in the future?
Yeah, so it's definitely something that the company's been thinking about. How do you create something that's, sort of viable, right? In terms of an oncology market and in that space and what have you. So there is a different formulation of CBM 588 that's being developed. Right now, we have a dose escalation study that's ongoing at our institution. So we're actually going to be using a 10-fold higher dose of the drug. It's going to be in a novel formulation, and that's what's going to be used in the phase 3 clinical trials. So it would be a totally different agent and meet the FDA requirements for a distinction with different dose, different formulation, et cetera.
Yeah, fantastic. Sapna's disappeared, but maybe she can still hear us. And so then maybe just to broaden out a little bit, Monty, I mean, we've sort of been talking about kidney cancer there, but you do treat different GU malignancies. I mean, is there any reason to suppose, let's say, in different malignancies, like where we're using checkpoint inhibitors or even other systemic therapeutic modalities, that there might be a role here? Obviously, a lot of the work so far has been in melanoma and lung cancer and kidney cancer, but it's a kind of obvious broader question. Have you got any sense of that at the moment?
Yeah, I mean, I can point to so many great examples of studies using this live bacterial product approach across different malignancies. There's a company that I'm very interested in called Excellium Bio that's based in Paris. And so they have a different bacterial reagent that they're focused on. Is from this investigator named Harry Sokol, who's based, I believe, in Paris, but he's focused on Fecalibacterium as a potential beneficial agent in the context of checkpoint inhibitors. So they have 3 studies, one in the context of hepatocellular with bevitezo plus their agent. They have a study looking in lung cancer at, a base regimen of chemo-IO with their agent, and also gastric. So, I think that as time goes on, we're going to see companies that are focused in different therapeutic spaces. And maybe in places where, the bar ostensibly is lower, right? I mean, in disease like, I'm going to use prostate as an example. It'd be amazing if you could I'm going to use a very cliche term here, take a cold tumor and turn it hot, right? So using the microbiome.
Yeah, thanks. Sapna, are you back with us or not? Oh, look, twice. You're here. Look,
Am I
you're
on
here
there
twice.
twice?
Yeah, one's frozen
No,
and
boy.
one's moving. Oh no, now both frozen.
Oh no.
I'm sure it'll be fine.
Okay.
Listen, I think I've asked all the things I wanted to ask Monty, and we've probably gone over half an hour by now in any case. I don't know, Sapna, is there anything else that you wanted to ask Monty? If not, maybe you could wrap up.
Yeah, though I think I'm going to hand it to you to wrap up because I'm a little worried my internet's too unstable to catch. It says you guys are still recording just fine, but I'm having some sort of snowstorm issue here that's killing my internet. But nothing else in my end. For if it makes it into the recording, Monty, I think this was incredible. This is just like one facet of research that you do, microbiome, and I think it's so exciting. Whatever we can translate over to melanoma and vice versa, I think we will. In that SWOG trial, let's have a cohort. As you successfully run this trial, let's think about a cohort, that we open up as an amendment that is for all solid tumors.
Love it.
Yeah. Okay. So maybe we'll wrap up. So listen, Monty, thanks so much for spending some time with us. It's been great, and I think that the background there, as well as the work that you're doing, and then to finish off hearing about this SWOG trial is just fantastic news. And I think for patients in the future, there's got incredible promise. So thank you so much.
Oh, cheers, guys. Thanks for having me.
Hi, welcome to our first ever guest fact check. And this is to cover the conversation we had with Monty Pal, which was great. But a couple of things did come up. One of them was this whole issue of Doogie Howser MD. And we still don't really know how old Monty is, do we, Sapna? No. So I guess
his age?
Yeah.
That we could have fact checked that before we hit
No,
record.
But we shouldn't. Anyway, he looks very young, so I'm sure he is very young. Anyway, so on that subject, Doogie Howser MD, American medical sitcom, which I'm sure most people know, which ran from September 89 to March 93, 97 episodes, starring Neil Patrick Harris, who's gone on to enormous success in the rest of his career. So, Sapna, you probably watched every episode, I would imagine, from what I can gather.
We may or may not have ever talked about this, but I was as kids today are plopped in front of their tablets and their devices, I was in front of a TV a lot as a kid, a lot. I never had any homework, or if I had homework, I did it in the car from school to home. So then there was like nothing to do but play and watch TV the rest of the night and evening. So I watched a lot of TV. Did watch Doogie Howser. I remember Vinny, Wanda, Doogie, the actor who played his father, who you'd then see in other things. And I'm certain because I was kind of young. At that time, I was junior high going into high school when that show finished. I'm sure it just sort of reinforced it, like made medicine look cool. There was this kid running around in a long white coat, prepubescent kid. Maybe pubescent is more of a fair statement. So yeah, I did watch it, enjoyed it. But now it's like comical to think that's really, a thing. But the reason we're even bringing it up is because that was Monty, who went to college at age 13. Amazing.
Yeah, well, I guess
Amazing.
the phrase "Doogie Howser MD" is, I think it's entered the lexicon here as well as in the US, definitely. So I know what it refers to, and I'm sure it was on TV here, but that was a period of my life. I'd just gone away to university, and so kind of the last thing I was doing was watching any television. So I can honestly say I've never watched it. I'm afraid. And then the other thing that we talked about was the South Park episode. Which is called Turd Burglars, where Kyle's mum has a fecal microbiome transplant, right? And
Yep,
then
that's right.
they're trying to optimize her microbiome. So, for the record, everybody, that was season 23, episode 8.
That's right.
I haven't watched that episode. You probably have.
Oh, multiple times. It's so good. It's really, as I mentioned in our recording, you know, the people are believing that Tom Brady must have the best microbiome, so they're running around trying to get his. It's great. It's fantastic.
So maybe I'll put that on my list of New Year's resolutions for 2025 to watch that episode.
Paramount Plus or YouTube. You can find it on YouTube.
Okay, so we're done.
All right. Great.